Welcome to the Life in the West podcast. I'm Trinity Vandenacre, your host. Today we're talking with Seth Watts and his friend Josh about the realities on the ground of wildlife management in California. Are you working on anything with the grizzly bear right now? The new initiative to start a new population in California. Any involved in that at all?
Yes, you're referring to Senate Bill 1305. So a couple of the state-oriented organizations that I represent are coming to a formal position on it, with the bill having been relatively recently introduced at the beginning of this legislative season. And California's legislative cycle runs from January through December. We're still waiting to determine the extent to which, if any, the authors will take some of the suggested amendments to perhaps tone down the level of ambition that they intend to introduce to the state via the what they refer to as the restoration of the grizzly bear in the state of California.
Let me ask you this. So my stance on this is we have grizzly bears all over up here because I'm in Montana, and what I've seen over the years is that grizzly bears they kind of get, I don't know, a lot of people fear them maybe more than they should, even though they do eat a couple people a year up here. But in my opinion, they're being used a lot on the stage to block a lot of other things. What I mean is through the Endangered Species Act, the absolute kind of overriding rights that the Endangered Species Act gives to an animal that you put on the list, the endangered species list, gives it, kind of supersedes the rights of everything else when it's in an area, right? And this is being used to do all kinds of things, like up here, shorten the wolf season. They've used that as like, oh, we might accidentally catch a bear in a wolf trap, even though it's never happened, but we might. So therefore we have to shorten the wolf season. That's the kind of thing I mean. It supersedes everything else, logging and ranching and everything. So down in your country, when you're talking about the aggressive, or whatever term you used for language of their operation, what they're looking to do with the grizzly bear, how does that fit with what I'm talking about, and what amendments are you talking about to kind of combat that? How aggressive are they getting first?
Well, so they've established a framework that that demonstrates the intent to, they use the word reintroduce the grizzly to California. I take what I consider to be a more ecologically precise term of introducing the grizzly, because the subspecies of grizzly that once existed in California, that has not existed for over 100 years, unfortunately, I would personally say, operates in an entirely different ecological niche than, say, the subspecies of grizzlies that are native to Montana and the Northern Rockies. So the authors don't demonstrate a level of understanding, much less a regard for the ecological implications of introducing a new subspecies of grizzly bear into the state of California, forgetting for a moment the fact that we have 40 million people in this state, and forgetting for a moment the fact that grizzlies, while they can and do occupy the higher elevation ecosystems, they much prefer the lower elevation ecosystems where life is a lot easier. And so they're forgetting the history of California, where the grizzlies that were once native here were encountered down in the valley and in the lower elevations, where, not so coincidentally, people also like to live and farm and ranch and recreate. And so this is largely a recipe for not necessarily disaster, that might be a bit theatrical, but certainly for a heightened level of human grizzly conflict. So what we're asking the author to do is consider amending the language of the bill so that it would not intend to necessarily restore the grizzly, but perhaps just simply assess the feasibility of bringing grizzlies to California or back to California, taking a more cautious approach and providing the California Department of Fish and Wildlife with far more time to conduct a feasibility study than what is currently allowed for in the legislation. So if passed, this bill would become effective January 1st, 2027, and it would mandate the department to provide their findings and their recommendation by June 30th of the following year. So it gives them a whopping 18 months. I interpret that to mean that they've already arrived at their conclusion, which is we want the grizzly back in California, and they're just mandating that the department gather the data as quickly as they can, ideally in a way that would support their conclusion, rather than doing it the other way around. Gather the data and see where that data leads you.
I hear this a lot, but then when you look back at history, anytime you start down a road, it's like starting a snowball rolling, right? As soon as you do the research, as soon as you we're going to do a feasibility study, and the people who are doing the feasibility study are the people who are making the decision, it seems like it never stops, right?
Once the ball's rolling, it's almost over. Like before it's even done, it's really, like you said, the decision's already been made that they're going to go through with it anyways. I mean, from my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, they want to bring 1,100 grizzly bears here. And I'm sure that's probably over a matter of time. That's what they think the state can handle. But the grizzly bear was, historically, like Josh was saying, they were in the valley, they were coastal bears, and the habitat that they were mostly in, that habitat is gone. Like, it's been paved over for the most part. It's all cities now, and they're not planning to put the bears back in that habitat that's gone. They want to put them like up in the Sierras, where those ranchers and the communities up there are already battling the wolf issue that's protected. They can't do any, ranchers can't do anything personally. The department has to use non-lethal, but they want to now add that other apex predator up there that would be protected forever. We're never going to be able to hunt those in my opinion. So it's a storm that will get out of control. I mean, 1,100 bears in the state, and then you put them up in those, basically the communities, and everybody that's going to vote for, Senate Bill 1305 is in the city. Yeah, they want bears, but they don't want them down there. They're going to put them up where the other people don't. The consequence is they put them where the people can't and don't want to handle them.
I'm going to cut in right here on my own podcast to tell you exactly why I focus so hard on these subjects. I was born and raised in Montana and have been involved in the industries that keep it alive my entire life. And this is what I hear all over. As rural Americans, our default setting is to mind our own business. We just want to do our jobs and raise our families and be left alone to enjoy the great outdoors. But while we've been keeping our heads down, the opposition has been working overtime. If we don't draw a line in the dirt now, we are going to wake up to a padlock on our favorite trailhead and a closed for conservation sign on our local campground. They'll tell you it's for your own safety or just to protect the environment. But make no mistake, the quiet takeover of our land is already in motion. They are systematically suffocating the independent rancher and the local logger. And when those industries are gone, you are the one who pays the bill. Go to highlonesomesociety.com, join the war room, fund the media campaign, and help us build the strategy to keep the West open. That's highlonesomesociety.com.
Yeah, let me ask you guys both this, because you said that it's a different subspecies of bear. It's kind of like the wolf argument to me. Mm-hmm. It's like we can't prove, it's really hard to prove what species is what, right? And subspecies or whatever. But I would contend that you're introducing them into something they have never been in before. Just like Seth said, it's not that we're introducing them into the environment they were in before, because this isn't it. This isn't 1805. It doesn't look like that. It's not going to be that. So even if you were going to put in the identical subspecies, it still isn't the habitat that they came out of.
No, you're spot on. That's exactly what
they want to. I mean, from what I see in the West, especially on the coast, Oregon, Washington, California, it's all about rewilding right now. Like, there's just a big push to rewild, but how do you rewild 2026 back to 1805 or early 1800s when, we supposedly had all these animals? the only way to do that is tear communities down, rip the roads up, and remove ourselves from, that ecosystem. That's not possible, and that's not going to happen. So I think it's, when they bring, supposedly they never brought the wolves here, but like, let's just say Colorado, when they take those wolves and they remove them from their ecosystem and they bring them to Colorado, an ecosystem that they don't know, like they would do with the grizzly bears, they would bring them here. I think that's animal abuse. Like, that animal probably doesn't want to be here, and ultimately some of them probably will die either from stress or conflict issues, whatever it is. If the grizzly bear wants to come here, it'll come here, right? It's just such a bad idea to begin with. And then, to think that we're just going to go back in time and have all these wonderful, predators. It's like you said, Trinity, there's a predator obsession. They're not doing this with, our deer and stuff like that. In my opinion, our elk are in California, starting to basically expand their range. The populations are getting a little bit better. But with that, now we have the wolves and they're growing. So that's probably going to disturb that a little bit. Then you bring in the grizzly bear. Yeah, they don't eat only meat, but they do eat meat and they do kill calves. So I don't know. It seems like there's
they do eat a lot of calves.
It just seems like there's an agenda out there, and they're just not telling us what it is, even though a lot of us probably can figure that out.
Well, the point that you make, Seth, about rewilding is an incredibly important one. And you even made reference to kind of a vitally important distinction, which is natural rewilding as opposed to artificial or human induced rewilding. So there has been and there continues to be natural rewilding, which is just the reclamation of historic range. We find this with the mountain lion, a species very near and dear to my heart. So the mountain lion has been gradually and very naturally moving eastward. And it's establishing what are called pioneering populations back into portions of its former range. By doing that, the populations are essentially acclimating to whatever the habitat is, the level of prey abundance of that particular area, and is essentially reaching a level of equilibrium by starting off really, really small, and will only grow to as great a degree as what the habitat and the availability of prey can support. During that time, adaptation is happening. And so while it doesn't eliminate altogether the risk of human and mountain lion conflict, it does reduce it, as opposed to taking a captured population of, say, British Columbian wolves and moving them down into Colorado, or the McKenzie Valley wolf, the largest subspecies of wolf on the planet, and moving it down into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. There is no gradual adaptation. There is no gradual reestablishment of an ecological niche that very small population is starting to carve out for itself. It's essentially equivalent to dropping a larger rock into that body of water. You're going to create a larger ripple effect, as opposed to putting in pebbles slowly but surely over time, if you understand the metaphor and reference I'm making. So by taking the grizzlies and bringing them from presumably Montana or maybe Canada or what have you, and bringing them down into here, you are not allowing for that natural adaptability that would take place for a natural immigration of grizzlies from a sustainable population down into an area without grizzlies, such as California.
I think the biggest problem is California doesn't have the prey population to support all of these apex predators, especially when they're protected with no hunting season or, management plan really, other than to do nothing. We haven't hunted cats since 1972, Josh. Was that when that happened? Yeah. And so,
wait a minute. So that's completely closed. Like there still isn't any hunting of cats.
No.
Correct.
No. Can you run them?
Governor Ronald Reagan signed a moratorium that signed legislation that established a moratorium when the department was reconsidering opening a sports season for them. And then that moratorium was made permanent via the passage of Proposition 117 in 1990. So California, despite having a fairly robust mountain lion population statewide, has not managed mountain lions for well over 30 years.
And to get a deprivation permit is a nightmare, pretty much. It's almost, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but like, it's really, pretty hard to get.
They're not. Are they under the endangered species list down there? Because I know this wolf thing has kind of changed how they use that. It's like on the species list in a specific area. I didn't realize they could do that, but they're doing it all over the place. Is that what they're doing with the cat down there?
Only very recently. So in February, the California Fish and Game Commission did decide to list a few subpopulations of mountain lions along the Central Coast and down in Southern California as being threatened, which is the lowest level of protection that California Endangered Species Act would afford. But another point is, in addition to mountain lions not being managed, bobcats cannot be hunted at all, despite Fish and Game estimates of as many as 250,000 bobcats in the state. Coyotes cannot be trapped. Black bear can be hunted only by
trapped down there either.
Correct.
But we can hunt them. You just can't trap them. So coyotes you can hunt 365 days a year, but you can't trap. And
so
then when we lost
happens when you get an animal, or they use the Endangered Species Act or put it on a list to gain control. If you aren't hunting them anyway, it doesn't do any good to put them on the list. So putting them on the list just makes it so they can supersede another rule. That's my interpretation of what's going on. One of the reasons I am completely against this predator obsession that's going on in the United States, and actually more than just the United States, is because this comes directly from a global a bunch of central written documents. And it's an ideology that we can allow nature to manage itself. And what they mean by that is we don't need humans to manage it anymore. So what we're fighting against, I actually have a problem with the entire term rewilding now, because I understand what they mean when they say rewilding. So even a trickle form of rewilding, or the term rewilding is to remove human management. So when you're talking about that, I disagree with it completely. I believe we can actually make, when you look at the populations, the populations of elk and deer up here in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, all through these western states. I'm not sure about California, but during about the 80s and 90s was the peak of their populations in the mountainous areas. And we had kind of a real boom in those ungulate populations, which caused the ability for really, really amazing hunting opportunities. One of the things that you see when you look at before that, what created that boost in population was lowering the predator populations to very low. And it's not like we eliminated any of them except for the wolves, but that was done in like the 40s. But it was also habitat. Now, when they talk about habitat, a lot of people focus on houses. But when you look at what happened up here in the West, we were heavily logging and grazing the mountain areas, which creates the very habitat that actually supports things like mule deer, which are very picky in the way that they digest things. They're not like elk where they can kind of switch to grazing. And now you've seen a shift of the elk populations down to the private land because we don't have enough grazing. It looks good to us as humans to have this old growth forest with grass in it. But elk and deer don't like that. They actually prefer the leafy, twiggy stuff that looks doesn't look quite as clean. That's the stuff that really supports them. So when you're talking about wildlife populations, we have several problems that all come with the attempt to remove the human from the management process, which I would say the hunter is the ultimate, because not only do they actually are able to manage the numbers of game animals to a very reliable, in a very reliable, controlled manner, but they also bring in revenue when they do it. When you put in predators of any kind and you let them overpopulate and you take out the human manager, and then we eliminate our industries like logging and things like that, you just take out money from the economy. And then we have to subsidize it with taxpayer dollars. We have to pay extraordinary amounts of money to manage the grizzly bear and the wolf, because they bring in nothing. I mean, and they are actually actively taking away game animals from hunters who would pay for that opportunity, pay into your economies, into the local economies, especially where we now have to be subsidized to even manage that. So what do you guys think about that? Looking at California, he was saying, Seth was saying, talking about the extraordinary numbers of black bears. If you have a high number of black bears, you have a really high number of coyotes, and you have a high number of mountain lions, your prey populations are going to suffer. Not only that, but you're probably eliminating a lot of logging on public ground, I assume. So then you have a lower population. The calf recruitment, like the baby animals that are surviving to adulthood, has got to be extremely low, which means you're not going to grow your herds, right? So it's kind of, do you guys see the same thing down there in California that I'm talking about up here?
Well, so our deer herd, like you were saying, Wyoming and those states were at the peak in like the 80s and stuff like that. Our deer herd has been on the decline since the 60s, and since 1990 we've lost 50% of our deer herd. And so I personally, I'm in the mountains a lot. The only logging I've seen on public land like national forest has been recently after some of the mega fires. I've seen them kind of go in there and basically it's almost they're logging it out of safety away from the roads. It's not like they're logging a lot, but we still have Sierra Pacific. They log. I think they're the largest landowner in California with like over 4 million acres. But they close their land right before the season opens every year for archery. So what could be maybe some really good hunting areas, for opportunity wise, it doesn't open again. They don't open their property again until usually late fall, late October. And then most of your deer seasons have closed by then. So it's we have to basically hunt public land, or unless you have private land you can hunt. Sierra Pacific cuts us out, and then there has been time in the last couple of years where we've had such they call fire danger that they have closed some public land and said, hey, out of fire danger you can't go to Plumas National Forest, or they've shut some down. And I think I've never seen that. I don't know about you, Josh, you're a little bit older than me, but I've never seen them do stuff like that until COVID. And once COVID happened, it seemed like shutting land down for public safety became kind of popular, and they realized that they could do it.
Well, I think that the recent fires kind of brought the sensitivity to fire danger to the forefront. And going back to what you had said, Trinity, I do think that there is an inclination to try and assume that human involvement in the management of the environment is always going to be a bad thing. I personally, like you, I find that to be incredibly naive. Just by virtue of our existence here, we've influenced the environment in such a way that I think that we are now ethically obligated to involve ourselves in its management. So we can't on the same hand suppress every natural fire, but then also ban logging. Logging essentially is the artificial apparatus for what natural fires would do, which is to remove portions of that old growth, old stage timber and foliage, and give opportunity for that new growth to come in, which you very rightly said, mule deer, being browsers, absolutely rely on. It's no secret in the hunting community about how productive a burn can be a couple years after. Why? Because that's where all the new growth is, and the new growth bring in the game. So the notion that we can just let nature be and let nature take its course is very, very naive and belongs, I think, in a Disney movie and there alone.
Yeah, they can't. If they want to do that, then we have to remove ourselves. We just have to pick up and move and go somewhere, because, like you were saying, Josh, it's our responsibility now to help manage these populations, and not just manage deer and elk. Most hunters want to see bears. You know, a lot of guys want to see wolves. I think seeing the wolves is pretty cool. Now, I know what they're doing, so that I'm kind of, like, I'm glad they're here. I'm not glad they're here. But, like, no hunter wants to just wipe a species off the earth. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people want to wipe the wolves out like they did back in the 40s, but, like, we want to see it all thrive, and we want to see a balance to where they can all thrive. But you have to keep, especially predators and ungulates, but predators mostly, I think, you have to control their populations. Look at our bears. 80,000 bears possibly in California. No other state has that except for Alaska. 80,000 bears. That's nuts. And just the damage that they're doing to our deer numbers, like you said, they eat a ton of fawns, and then
lots of fawns. So let me ask you this. So when you're talking about balance, me personally, I'm against any introduction of any more predators anywhere because of the control that goes with them. It not necessarily that it's going to cause a massive problem. The control that the NGOs are having over our wild places and over every area where they get an endangered species. So anytime they put even like you're talking about, Josh, even when there's just cats already there, they're putting them on the list. Why are they doing that? It's not just to protect the cat. It was already protected. It's to gain more control. So I'm against any introduction. Now, as far as balance goes, here's what I've discovered over the course of all of everything I've done is mountain lions have a massive impact on game populations. Grizzly bears and black bears have more of an impact on game populations due to the fact that they're eating the fawns, not necessarily a lot of big animals. But mountain lions, even up here where we can hunt them, they're very easy to regulate, especially with hounds. Or not, I wouldn't say they're really easy. They're much easier because you can tree one with hounds. You can go cut a track and tree one with hounds and take that mountain lion. So all you got to do is up a quota if you're going to adjust the numbers. We can't really hunt the grizzly. We can't hunt the grizzly bears up here, so I'm not sure how easy they are. But we keep our black bear population up here in pretty good control just by upping the numbers of tags and the areas and extending the seasons, things like that. Wolves are another story. They are unbelievably difficult to manage the numbers of. And the reason they are is because they range so far. And if you look at, one of the things that actually makes them like a Disney animal actually also makes them very, very difficult to manage is they're very intelligent. Before we hunted them up here, they were beginning, and you guys will see this once they get populated a little bit. They started to get extremely bold. They were showing up in people's backyards. They were trying to take pets off of back porches. They were attacking horses tied to horse trailers, while people are there. we're watching this happen right now in Colorado. One pack was actually eliminated because it's starting to shadow hikers. So they get very bold, but when you start hunting them, they flat out disappear. They learn very quickly. As if you look at our trapping season, we actually trap a lot of wolves, but they're almost all the young ones. The old ones have already been through this. They understand, and they keep to the shadows. They know where to go to stay out of these things. They're extremely intelligent, hard to manage. So as soon as the season's over, it's like having a business where you have a drunk uncle that can take out of your bank account from the back end, and you don't have any idea how much he's going to take out. There really isn't any way to manage your game populations consistently with wolves. They make everything very difficult to manage. You're just not sure wherever your numbers are going to be, because they're taking adult animals and young animals all year round with no limit. So, and they actually are having an effect, even with the studies that they did up here in Yellowstone, they're having an effect on how many animals the mountain lions kill. I was reading a study that they did there where mountain lions don't hold their ground on a kill. So they'll kill something and wolves will show up and they'll just leave. And they'll go kill again while the wolves eat that game animal, because they just don't stand their ground. So they're actually causing, I don't know about forcing, but causing the cats to kill more animals. So when you look at balance takes, some common sense. It takes some common sense to look at these things and go, we can balance the ecosystems that we have with certain predators. Wolves make it very difficult. They're one, as far as I can tell, they're about the most difficult thing to manage as far as what they can do to the game herds. Because up here, we had a situation over about 100 miles from me where they got on this one group of wolves before we could hunt them, got on a group of 40 bull elk, and they just killed the whole herd in 2 or 3 months. If they get in the right situation with the right weather pattern where it weakens the animals and they are stronger, they'll just keep on killing. It doesn't matter if they're feeding or not. So that makes it difficult to balance something. What are your guys' thoughts on this? I know you guys are dealing with a lot of predators, but wolves are probably fairly new down there, or?
Well, yes, they are relatively new, and you're spot on, Trinity. Ecologically speaking, in terms of what the wolf represents, wolves, unlike grizzlies and black bear, are obligate predators. They must eat meat, just like the mountain lion. But the mountain lion is a solitary hunter, unlike the wolf. So the wolf is kind of, and I don't want to use politically charged terminology like a perfect storm or anything like that, but for purposes of what you said, they do represent the most complicated dynamic to manage by virtue of the fact that they must always eat meat, and there are numerous individuals within a pack. And then you add to that their high level of intelligence and adaptability to human attempts at taking them by trapping and hunting, etc. It does add very significantly to the complexity of trying to manage the wolf, and then therefore by implication managing the ungulate populations within that wolf habitat.
And what you were saying, Trinity, about like that we will eventually see the wolves get bold, and we already see that the wolves up in some of these mountain communities like Sierra Valley, the wolves will just stand on the side of the road. People sitting there videoing them. They stand there. The wolves killed I believe it was a cow elk on the back porch of somebody's house and just killed it on the porch right there in their yard. And so a lot of people are worried about the public safety part, but like that boldness, it's already here. And supposedly we only have, in the high 70s of wolves. I don't know if I believe that. It's actually pretty wild to see some of these videos that people will post online, and you're like, how is that even a real wolf? It acts like a domestic dog, like it's almost like somebody raised it and let it go, because it just stares at people at 20, 30 yards. And it's kind of like, hey, you're going to feed me? That's how they act. And so Sierra Valley and Modoc County have been just, they're the ones that have basically, Lassen County, a little bit in Plumas County, but those communities have been, pounded by the impact of those wolves, especially on their cattle. I think that the wolf pack, I can never pronounce that name correctly. What's it called up there in Sierra Valley? Beyem
Seyo. Beyem Seyo.
Yeah.
Beyem Seyo.
They killed 90 cattle, 90 calves, and probably a few, adult cattle, in one summer. And so Fish and Wildlife did go in there and remove 4 of them. I think it was last fall. Well, I don't think it was in the summertime. It was last fall that they went in and removed them. And there was a pretty big uproar about it. But, like you say, they're highly intelligent animals. My personal belief is, like you were saying, Trinity, if they had pressure on them, those animals are going to learn with either the hunting pressure from hunting, or, even the cattle ranchers, putting a little pressure on them, like lethal force, that they will eventually learn that, hey, our pack numbers are dwindling. It's not safe to be down here. We're either getting shot at or trapped or whatever it might be. And they will push up into the higher elevation. I'm sure once in a while they'd come down, but I mean, every animal predator wise, and we've seen it here, especially with the bears, as soon as they lost hounds in 2012, 2013, that you never used to see bears in the mountain community, like in the little towns, very, 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 not very often. Now, because they don't get chased with hounds, they're not afraid of dogs and they're not afraid of humans. So they have major, bear issues. And now we're seeing it with the wolves, where there's no, I always say when somebody shoots at an animal and they miss, I always say, you just educated that animal. They're not dumb. They realize what's happening, especially when one is, one of their pack members is, eliminated. It's just common sense, and we don't have a lot of that here within, a lot of people here. It's all feelings, emotional base.
Well, and I think we're living in a society of the emotional based thing, right? That's just happening everywhere. People are making decisions based on their emotions. Well, what do you guys see about the economic side of this? I mean, so one of the reasons I focus a lot on logging is because of the impact it has in rural communities. Right now, global industries, and what I mean by that is hedge funds and people buying credits to rewild everything. The nature credit system is actually trying to invest in buy our nature resources. Basically, I can't say it any other way. It's not really purchase it forever. It's purchase it for a certain amount of time. These contracts, these permanence periods in California are 100 years. And when you do that, you completely bypass all the economic benefit that comes to small communities from industries like logging and hunting. I always include hunting in there because when you hunt an animal, the money that's spent on that animal by hunters actually goes back into to conserving that animal, creating more of them, creating habitat for them things. And when you do outside influence, was when you sell your resources to a hedge fund in Brussels, it literally benefits the agencies, the government agencies that are taking the funds for that, or the private person who's selling the credits off their land, and literally nobody else. It doesn't go back into to managing that animal. When we're talking about the logging industry, and you were saying that they shut out everybody, I put together what in my community, the High Lonesome community, the High Lonesome Society, actually, I put together something that I'm trying to refine as ways to combat what's happening in the West. And one of the things I was talking about is we must put together, we're already spending this money anyway. I mean, The wolves in Montana cost us $1,700 a wolf every year to manage. Far, far, far more than we could ever make on tags for wolves. The same thing with especially the wolves in your guys' area. We're not even hunting them. Colorado spent $160,000 per wolf in the last 12 months on their wolves, managing them. The unbelievable financial drain these things have on our taxes and resources, our industries, is insane when you look at it. And yet hunters, if you allow hunters to hunt something, like if you just overnight removed wolves and you had hunters do the same job as the wolves, you would have money coming into your communities everywhere. And that, I think, is one of the things we have overlooked as a strategy from the environmental side. And not that the thing is that when I say that, some people are probably like, well, he's just for destroying all, acid rain, right? But I love our wild places. The last thing I want to do is see them go to heck. I want to see more game animals, not less game animals. And that's why I'm talking about this, to have more. I also don't want to see everybody in the whole West be completely have their incomes and taxes siphoned away from us, along with the ownership of our resources. So what are you seeing in California? Because I've been looking at Oregon and Washington. What are you seeing in California along the lines of economic shift from industries on the ground that actually supply our local communities to, agencies and litigation and all that? What are you guys seeing as far as that, as far as the hunting goes? Hunting industries down there.
So I can speak to that, Trinity. Seth had made reference to the legislation that was signed into law in 2012 that would ban the use of hounds for the pursuit of black bears. And 33 of the 58 counties of California, their boards of supervisors took a formal position on that legislation, Senate Bill 1221. 32 of those 33 took an opposed position, with the one county that supported that legislation being Marin County, which is just north of San Francisco. Marin County does not have black bears or black bear hunters or black bear hounds. Therefore, I don't think they had much business weighing in on something that would not affect them personally. But all of those other counties that did take an opposed position to that legislation were in black bear habitat where black bear hunting did occur. Now, why did those county boards of supervisors presumably take the opposed position? I think because they very rightfully recognize that it would cause a financial impact to their counties, in addition to the impact that it would have in an undermanaged black bear population coming down into towns, as Seth had made reference to. The beauty of having an established hunting season allows for the generation of revenues with the smallest footprint, per capita footprint, when in comparison to other methods of revenue generation by interacting with wildlife and wild land, such as ecotourism. So you'll always hear the argument about why non-consumptive safaris in Africa are preferable to big game hunting over there. That's not accurate when you consider the ecological impact that large numbers of people have in the land cruisers and in the tour buses and things of that nature. It's far more disruptive to those natural systems to have so many people interacting with that wildlife than if you have hunters, because that individual hunter is going to put a lot more money into their tag and their license, the trophy fee, et cetera, than those ecotourists. So I think we don't have safaris, obviously, in California or in the United States, but the general economic rule still applies, where we are able to generate far greater amounts of revenue with far less negative impact on the landscape or the wildlife that occupies that, with the North American model of wildlife conservation.
Marin County they should want the grizzly bear, right? They should want that bear back because there was a ton of grizzly bears in Marin County. But, of course they're not, it's not where they're going to put them. So they should bring them though, because wouldn't it bring them money for people to come look at them, while they're chewing on somebody down there, everybody could sit around and watch, it's that, I don't know. I see a difference, from when the hounds were around and the amount of people you might see up in mountains. And I talk to people in a lot of those communities, especially up in Lassen. They don't see, the hotels and the motels getting filled up. They see less hunters up there every year, because the deer numbers are falling. A lot of people feel like it's not worth hunting anymore. And so there's definitely impacts happening in those communities that depend on that income in their community, so they can make a living. And then, like you say, that money eventually ends up back, supporting wildlife in a way. So I see it all the time, every year. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Well, and when you look at the other side, it has to come from somewhere. So there's money, like I was just saying, all this stuff costs money, to manage more things. And the more we kill our industries off, the more it has to come from general fund taxes or property taxes of the individual. The more industries we take out that we're paying revenue shares to our counties are now being subsidized with the general fund from federal programs like PILT and SRS, which comes directly out of our taxes. So, and we lose the local sawmill, which was very, a lot of people don't realize the local sawmills were taxed at a much higher rate. They were taxed at a commercial rate of like class 4 or class 5 or whatever it was. So your property taxes in a county are going to go up to cover the loss of that mill revenue, not just the revenue that went into the community, but actually the tax revenue that came off of that. They have to bring up your property taxes to fill the gap. And that's where how they're selling this outside money coming in from the big hedge funds and Wall Street and everything, is they're going to fill this gap of the revenue that we don't have. But when you really look at it, they are creating the gap in the revenue and then going to be our savior and buy the rights to our land to fill the gap that they created. So it's a huge danger I see to the West. That's why one of the reasons I'm against wolves entirely, except for maybe in like some place like, and I'm not like for wiping them out, but we shouldn't have a controlled season. They shouldn't be protected at all. There's 250,000 of them in the world. And when I say that, people are like, oh, that's not very many. But when you consider that each one kills 20 elk-sized game a year, that is an enormous consumption of game animals that could then bring in revenue instead of taking it back out, much less also putting pressure, like Seth said, on our ranchers, which is putting pressure, more and more pressure on our food supply, which we have to get from somewhere. And if anything has taught us, just look at what's happening right now in the world. When you have a choke point, somebody commented on one of my things the other day and said, well, Montana, which is massive. Okay, Montana is 600 miles across when you drive across this thing. It is huge. It's got more cattle than people. And the comment was that, well, it only supplies 2% of the beef we need, so we could do without it. Now, if you think that you can eliminate a million head of cattle, well over a million head of cattle, and which is directly goes into your food supply every single year and not have an impact because we can just import it from somewhere else. This applies to any product that we actually need. Then you create a dependency on that person for that product. And then you have something happen like we just see in the world with like the Strait of Hormuz. Anything happens to that choke point and it affects you in every way, every area of your life. So that is the last thing I want to see. This is a fight for what we have, our very livelihoods, the sovereignty of our nation, the ability that we have to generate our own economies. the things that actually supply us so we can survive when something happens outside of our area, and we're selling them away and then adding predators in to replace the human on the ground. It's creating a situation where we're going to look back in 10 or 15 years if we don't step up to the plate here, and we're going to be in the hands of someone else, and a disaster will befall. We may not notice it right then, but when a disaster comes or anything changes, we're in the hands of somebody, and it's probably going to be some massive corporation at this point with the way this is going. So I appreciate you guys coming on here. This was a good conversation. We covered a lot of deep subjects, and I hope to talk to you guys more in the future. And I appreciate it.
Hey, can we touch on one thing, Trinity?
Yeah, go ahead. If you got anything else.
I want because I think a lot of people in California, I talk to them about this, and I'm not that educated on it, and I've heard you speak about it, but land credits, like I hear you talk about, that's what they're called, right? Land credits. Can you explain that? Because there's going to be a lot of people in California.
Nature credits.
Nature credits.
They're actually nature credits. It's like selling, but they can be water, they can be carbon, they can be biodiversity. They're just applying them to any individual thing on the land. So they're not selling the land. They're selling like a mineral right to the land, but it's tied to your deed. So you're giving away the right for 100 years to whatever it is that they're buying. Yes, go ahead, Seth.
No, I wanted you to explain how that, like, the impacts with the grizzly bear and the credits that could be, like some of the reservations and stuff. They can work with the department or the state or whatever to get that, to put the grizzly bear in that area, and then eventually how that basically locks humans out of it.
Yeah. So when I talk about the fact that we're locking humans out, you just have to look at history. What we're seeing happen is when you have outside influences, these massive companies. Now, the reason for that is cap and trade. It's the same thing as cap and trade. It's the idea that a large company doesn't have to, I guess, lower their emissions. First of all, we've created emissions as being, we've included CO2 in their emissions. So we're saying that CO2 is a chemical that's harmful to humans. Therefore, they have to limit how much CO2 they produce. And so these companies are then incentivized through regulation and now ESG scores. So they're trying to make themselves look good. They're better to the world. And a lot of times they can't actually trade goods with other countries or do business in other countries unless they have an ESG score that is, whatever it's supposed to be. So they're trying to raise that all the time. They can do that by lowering their emissions in their company, or they have set up a way that they can purchase nature credits from land, from either another company who has an allotted amount by the state, which would be like a cap. So when you hear cap and trade, every company is allotted a certain amount of credits they can emit. So if a company is going to only emit 10,000 and they're allotted 20,000, they can trade that with another company that needs more of those credits. So they don't actually have to, let's say, lower their emissions. They can just buy the credits from somebody else. Well, that also applies to this, because another way you can offset your emissions, when you hear offset your footprint or offset your carbon footprint, this is what they're referring to, is now we can actually purchase the carbon from a piece of land. Now, what that means is like you can buy a timber stand, a piece of land like they're doing in California. They're doing it right now in Washington State. The state of Washington is doing it on public land. They're setting up a system where they can actually purchase the carbon in the timber, which means that when they sign that contract and you sell those credits to a company, so there's a lot of moving parts to this. The person that's selling the credits has to own or have the rights to the land. Then they basically produce them through a registry. Registries are massive, basically credit banks. They're not banks that hold money. They're banks that hold nature credits, and they give value to them, like Vera in Washington, D.C. California has its own. So they give value to them and they sell them to companies that then put them on their balance sheet as an asset. So if they can buy carbon credits from a project or a piece of land in California, like they're doing right now, they can put them on their balance sheet and they have a value. A balance sheet is just a business, it's a business equation. It's like how much debt do you have versus how many things do you own? And on your balance sheet under assets, you can actually put these carbon or nature credits in there, and whatever value that is, you can borrow money against them. You can you raise your ESG score depending on what those credits are. Well, those credits actually tie to the land. So if you purchase the credits, then for 100 years, like if you were purchasing carbon credits, for 100 years, you couldn't cut the timber on that piece of land. That would mean it would lock that timber for 100 years. That's the base amount of time for a carbon credit. That's if you sold one credit off of whatever project they put. It ties the whole thing up for 100 years under contract to a company. This is where the danger comes in, because they're adding now biodiversity credits, which are biodiversity credits are actually purchasing the biodiversity on the land. Same thing as the carbon, but it's much harder to track, right? So they put cameras and they use all kinds of equations to figure out the value of these things. And if you have, I believe it's because of the replacement of humans thing, but if you put a top tier predator on there, if you have a top tier predator, grizzly bear or a wolf or even a mountain lion, especially if it's on the endangered species list, that even ups the value of the biodiversity, because according to the system of credits, a perfectly intact system does not include humans. That means that the more humans interact with it, the less value this carbon credit has, or this biodiversity credit has. So the more you put grizzly bears in, the more you can get grizzly bears on the land, the higher the value of credits you can sell off of that land, especially if they're still protected. So if you can get any protected species on there that's a top tier predator, it raises the intactness score, the BII, which I think is the biodiversity index. So that is what they're trying to do. When you see all these projects, it not only gives control over somebody short term, which is for they can litigate anything. They can now sue you because your cattle are disturbing, may have an impact on the grizzly bear, right? They can also limit the amount of human impact, because hunting on any land where there's biodiversity, even carbon credits, is questionable. Because human impact in that is written right in these contracts that has a negative impact. So that's going to lower the value of somebody's biodiversity credits, and they're going to be a massive company somewhere in the world. You better believe you're not going to have more rights than they do. Not something we want to do is transfer the rights to the land that we now can use to a global corporation. That's why I kind of harp on the thing. That's why I was talking about the Strait of Hormuz and everything. It's the same principle. If we're handing over control through these nature credit systems to somebody else and expecting them to just be benevolent and, oh, well, you guys can still camp on it. You guys can still hunt there. You just have to look around. I mean, in the state of Washington, there's a lot of stuff going on. They stopped 28% of the logging on public land, while at the same time signing a document that created the setup for 77,000 acres that they're going to sell carbon credits on. Coincidence? And then, of course, now they're out of money. So because they just shut off all the logging, and they're like, wow, we're going to have to close some campgrounds and some trailheads because we don't have enough money. Well, it could be because you just eliminated the money you could have got from that timber sale. And if you think it's going to come back when they get the carbon credits in there, I doubt it, because those carbon credits are the value of the credits is only going to be good if you don't have the human impacting the value of it. This is a very technical, complicated thing, and you're hearing my opinions on it, all my knowledge that I've gained over just trying to research this enormous subject. But it's like this. It's just simplest case is this. It's rewilding, eliminating human management of any nature, so they can lift the nature off of the natural resources. They call them nature services, off of a piece of property and put them on the balance sheet of a massive company that needs to basically, they're not going to lower their emissions. They're going to buy credits so they can hit their net zero targets. This is literally how this is working right now. The United States, luckily, is pulling out of every one of these things. They're pulling out of all the UN, anything that has to do with this kind of stuff. They're pulling out. In fact, they're actively fighting it. But the problem is it's in the private sector. It's financially based. So it's really hard to. It's like it's actually based on the principles of capitalism is what it is. They're just selling something else. They're selling the rights that we actually enjoy right out from under us through incentivizing the value of nature. I hope that made sense a little bit, guys.
So a company here like Sierra Pacific that makes their money from logging, they're probably not eligible for that because they log.
Well, they wouldn't even be interested in it because that it takes away their entire business. So, I mean, like when we talk about this thing, I tried to associate this in this way. I was associating with when we have timber sale. There was a $10 million timber sale across the valley from me, and I'm throwing out the $10 million number. I don't know exactly what they sold that timber for. Okay. When you see these selective log things, those are usually something the Forest Service is paying for. I'm talking about a timber sale where they go in and actually harvest the timber for money. On a timber sale like that in 1970, this is how it would work. A lumber company would come buy the standing timber from the Forest Service for $10 million, let's say. 25% of that was dedicated to go to the county where the timber was cut. So they would take $10 million. The Forest Service would pay $2.5 million directly to the county. That's called revenue sharing, would go to the schools and the roads. The other $7.5 million will go to the Forest Service to use in management of the rest of their forest projects, right? Of the rest of their forests. And then the logging company will go up and cut that timber and bring it back to the mill, which created all kinds of jobs that were in your county that actually paid. Those guys bought stuff in your county. You're creating a product that then goes out domestically, a product that's created in your own country that goes out that we use for building materials and everything like that. Now, let's contrast that to today with this exact thing. The Forest Service puts up a project several years ago now. Let's say if that was $10 million, they immediately got sued by an NGO they used, as far as I can tell, they used the Equal Access for Justice law. So most likely we paid tax dollars to sue the Forest Service. We paid their lawyers to sue us. They tied it up in court for 2 years. After 2 years, the lumber was no good. So the timber sale completely fell through. Now so we got to pay the lawyers, which are about, let's say, $100,000 to the lawyers of the NGO. That's all tax dollars. About $500,000 in lawyer fees for the Forest Service itself. So that's tax dollars. Then we didn't get the timber sale. So the revenue to the county goes away. The sawmill literally went out of business because they cannot get enough timber and they're worried that every sale is going to be litigated, which it is. So that you lose all that tax revenue, you lose the jobs in your local community, you lose all that money that flows into your industry, you lose the products that go out into your country from your country. So what we're doing now, and that creates the hole that then the global industries will come in and say, now we're going to create credits on that and we're going to pay you directly to fill that financial gap. The problem is now it's coming directly from a global entity to the agency. They're paying whoever owns the land. So the entire community, our taxes are all going down the tubes now because we're paying for all this, and we never see a dime of the money that came from the nature credit system. So it is all if anybody, and I can't believe there's a lot of hunters that think that they're going to benefit from this. They're like, oh, we're going to put the big bad rancher out of business and we're going to create all these wilderness areas where we can hunt. And they just aren't seeing the big picture. That's why when I look at wolves, I see them in a different light. It is a tool to replace the human, because if we can create balance without the human or something like it, when they call trophic cascade, if we can grow the willow because we put wolves in there. Well, now we can say we don't need humans, right? We don't need the human hunter. And that's just, it's extracting our resources and our economy directly out, and our security for our food and our industries right out the door. Hopefully that makes sense.
So then what happens when they eliminate hunters and the revenue from people buying tags and licenses? What happens to these departments and how do they get their money? Because one thing that I've heard it for a long time, but one thing I'm hearing more and more from hunters is we need to not buy tags and licenses, and so that the department will come around and that they will give us more hunting opportunity. We can't support them anymore, so we need to hit them where it hurts, which is in their pocketbook. I don't see it that way. I feel like that would probably backfire. But
well, I'll give you my answer, and then Josh can answer that too. Because one thing, it's like this: there was a basketball team in our local area, high school basketball team, and the coach was kind of he's still the coach. He's hard, he's a tough coach, right? But he's actually a pretty good coach. And the boys got together and decided on that team that they're going to create a pact and all quit, right? And this is going to sock it to the coach, right? Now, who loses in that scenario? It's the kids. So when you're hunters thinking that you're not going to pay for the very thing that finances your industry, which is tags, and you're going to pull away from that so that you can sock it to the agency, they're just going to replace it with something that is going to put you out of business. They're already looking. A lot of these agencies are already looking for ways to finance you out of business anyway. So why would you give them an excuse? Man, I buy tags even if I'm not going to use them. What do you think, Josh?
No, I think you're spot on, Trinity. And I mean, ultimately, the quality of the product, which is the management of our wildlife, will deteriorate, will decline if the revenue that the agency is generating from the sale of licenses and tags declines. We already in California, you'll find that our agency will tell you uncharacteristically candidly, because they're very highly politically sensitive, and so they're not going to necessarily be direct and candid about most of their thoughts, but they will tell you that they are over mandated and under resourced. In fact, in the Senate summary for SB 1305, the Grizzly Restoration Act, that was a concern that the department raised when they provided some of their feedback and input into 1305, saying, look, we don't even have the staffing and other resources necessary to adequately understand the needs of and manage all of the wildlife that we have here today. We are definitely not going to have the resources to contemplate what a restored grizzly population may mean for the state. In fact, they even cited they're at approximately 33% effectiveness right now. So they have 33% of the resources that they believe that they need for things very specific to the management of various native species. So yes, the notion of boycotting as a way of demonstrating our discontent and dissatisfaction with what is taking place today, I think is only going to make our problem worse. It's just going to exacerbate the very concerns that we have with the agency today.
I've been told, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I've been told we do not have the budget to do the study to see if, the grizzly bear thing, that we do not have the money, thanks to our governor who has blown, billions of dollars, that we are in a hole as, you know, the state. They just don't have the funds to do the study for the grizzly bears, and that, you know, if SB 1305 passes, they're going to be forced to do that study. Where are they going to get the money? In my opinion, that pulls resources from other projects that we should be focusing on, like restoring deer numbers and, you know, and elk numbers and, you know, pronghorn, you know, whatever. But they're going to take it from somewhere to use it. And that just hurts us. You know, we got a bullet train somewhere in California. I don't know how much money they've spent on that, but we don't have the money. The state is broke.
It's all about it. What I view it as is, like I just said, when you look at the big picture of how, when you back up, you can see when we destroy our industries, we actually destroy our freedom. Because when we get rid of those industries, then we are not the ones financing ourselves. We're then reliant on subsidies. And for some reason, people can't get this picture in their head. Subsidies mean that we have to pay taxes for that subsidy. So we're paying to subsidize ourselves, but we don't have the industry that made the income to then pay into the thing. We have to come up with another way to make it. Why it feels so hard out in the West right now, in my opinion, is because we're losing our industries, but our burdens have gone up because we're losing the revenue and the actual industry that created jobs and wealth and for the little guy. You know, we're trying to feed this huge system, and yet they're trying to tie our hands on the ground and then limit hunting on top of it, which puts a lot of money back in the system for the very things that we're trying to protect, or they say we're trying to protect. So it has to be turned back around. Sovereignty has to be funding ourselves, which means we have to find a way to increase our industries again. To do that, I believe we have to win over the general public. These things are made, our industries are shut down through legislative decisions from people that don't live where we live. You look at the wolf issue, even when they came into Yellowstone, nobody that where we were putting wolves actually wanted wolves to be introduced here. It was all outside influence. The general public has more power because there's more of them, and we never speak to them. That's why we're doing this call. We have to speak to people that don't agree with us and that understand there's a problem, but don't really understand what I just said until you point it out. Like, hey, when the guy in Washington says there's a problem with the budget, they don't have enough money, but he is actually the very person who shut down logging. They don't understand what that means, why that means we have a shortage of money because the logging industry, the money from the logging industry is on their state land, which funds the recreation side of their programs. So if you cut the logging, of course, you're not going to have enough money in your budget. But, you know, we have to just be the ones to point that out and show the reality on the ground. And we can show individual things like what's happening here and what's happening in Oregon, but it's really a big picture. It's like we have to wake up, or we're going to find that somebody else owns the Strait of Hormuz for our meat, and somebody owns the Strait of Hormuz for the building materials that we need to build a house, and we are not going to be able to get them because we have sold them 10 years ago. Or we have allowed them to be sold 10 years ago. And the person sitting in their kitchen right now, they have to understand that they are going to be the ones footing the bill for this. All of us are. Because the more industry doesn't pay in, the more you have to pay in. And it's just being siphoned off in more of your resources lost at the same time. It's a lose-lose. And what I would call what we've been doing, which is we wait for something to happen. We wait for the grizzly bear to be introduced to California, and then we fight it. Or we even wait for the initiative to show up before we fight it. And we could have a completely different conversation if you eliminated control of that area, and you weren't going to put it on the endangered species list. You were going to have a management plan right up front that included revenue that came into our local communities, and then you're going to put in a grizzly bear. Now, I would have a different conversation about that. But if it's only going to cost the taxpayer for the studies, for the management, you're not going to be able to manage them. They're actually taking out resources because they're taking out game that could bring resources in. Then I'm entirely against it, because every single person is going to pay for that. Every person in the state of California will pay money into that one way or another. And they'll lose more and more of their freedom the more we go down this road. So,
So the grizzly bear thing just passed through committee.
I saw that.
Now it goes to the Senate, So
it passed its committee of origin, the Senate Natural Resources Committee. It was a 5-2 vote, all 5 of the Democrats on the committee voting aye, and both Republicans on the committee voting no. Now it goes into the Senate Appropriations Committee. Yeah. Appropriations only looks at the dollars and cents. What's this going to cost? How is it funded? Et cetera, et cetera. The fact that this legislation does not earmark any funding specifically for the feasibility study, and in fact says very specifically the Department of Fish and Wildlife can use whatever funding that it has at its disposal, is precisely what the two of you were making reference to earlier, where now they're going to have to rob from Peter to pay Paul. We already are undermanaging and mismanaging in many cases our native species of wildlife. Those species are going to be less well served by having funding siphoned off from the management of those programs to try and determine whether or not the country's highest tier predator is going to be able to get along with 40 million people. And I mean, it's obvious what the conclusion ought to be, but there's going to be a lot of money spent to try and demonstrate whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys answering that question about, stop hunting, don't pay. That's one of the top comments I get on my social media. I get that one, and then I get, they were here first, as far as predators. And then the other one I get is, what is it? That they were here first, stop paying. Why am I drawing a blank right now? Right when I wanted to say it.
I get we're here first a lot, even from a professor up here in a college sent me an email, a scathing email. I mean, scathing. All it was personal insults. And this is a professor, a biology professor from an agricultural town that's entirely agriculture. And his opinion was that humans are invaders. So I can't imagine coming out of his college class hearing anything that what we just said. When you remove we cannot go back to they were here first, because who was here first? You can that can be back to forever, but we can't. We have to manage actual reality, not fantasy. Managing 1805, like it was all better without us, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's completely off the table and irrelevant, because we cannot go back to that unless you eliminate all the cities, towns, roads, highways, people, everything that we've built over you can't. It's not going to happen. So therefore, that doesn't matter that they were here first. You have to manage 2026.
You're exactly right, Trinity. And something that I do find funny is that the people that lead the charge on that ideology, I never see being the first to volunteer to knock down their house, give up their cars, and do something with their life. I'm not going to say that necessarily on the air, but they're really enthusiastic when it comes to pointing out the human race as the invasive species, as not belonging here. But that's as far as they get. They never are the ones to volunteer to, sacrifice their lives and their lifestyle in support of their ideals. So it goes back to what you said. You're right. The wildlife was here first, but we're here now. What do you presume to do about it? And
well, nature will balance nature will balance itself. That was the other one. Those are the top three. Nature will
Exactly.
balance itself. They were here first, and hey, let's just defund. Let's not pay any tags and licenses.
And ecologically, I mean, that belongs in a Disney movie. There's no ecological substantiation for that anymore, because yes, in a vacuum, absent people, that could likely take place. But there would potentially be at a cost of species. It's the extinction of species, so Darwinism at work. But even if that was not going to be the case, there's going to be the ebb and the flow of the prey species, which then influences the ebb and flow that results to the predatory species. By our existence here, we cannot let nature take its course. We have modified the land in ways that are beneficial to some species and harmful to others. So we need to recognize that, and we need to stay involved. We can't just let nature take its course any longer. In California, we have dammed up all of our river systems, and then through cultivation, we create checks and rows to our crops and things of that nature. And the lack of persistent flooding that once existed now allows for a larger than natural populations of mesopredators like skunks to live that might otherwise would have drowned. Well, then we also localize the waterfowl populations by virtue of cultivation, which is necessary to feed the world, California being the breadbasket, as we're called. So all that does is funnel those mesopredators, such as skunks and possums, into those smaller areas for the water, where the waterfowl and other ground nesting birds will lay their eggs. We can't let nature take its course. We've already altered it. Nature would normally flood those floodplains and kill off certain percentages of skunks and other mesopredators. We've now stopped that. The waterfowl and other ground nesting birds would be nesting in a far more distributed fashion than just in those areas that are not under cultivation. And so we cannot let nature take its course in that regard either. We're obligated to take skunks and other mesopredators irrespective of whether or not we think that they're fit to eat. Because that is another one of those misnomers when it comes to hunting. Even in the hunting community, there is a condemnation for the take of certain species unless it's going to be eaten. The consumption of that animal that we take is actually a byproduct to the actual purpose of hunting, which is conflict management. We're trying to mitigate conflict that species has with itself, with other species of plants and animals, and with the habitat, and then finally conflict with human enterprise, such as living and farming and ranching and other things. So we're obligated ethically to manage wildlife to the very best of our abilities, which is not going to be based on what we feel, what we've seen on TV, whether or not the Humane Society's told us that hunting is bad in a 30-second commercial. We owe it to the wildlife that we say that we care about to apply the very best of most available science by those that are most educated to gather the data and come to those logical conclusions in order to know what's best for our native species.
I think it's so important too, the conversation we just had, though, because there's a massive amount of hunters that don't understand what's happening. And when you look at certain industries, you think there are enemies, but that's actually what funds the very thing you do. And it funds our lifestyle in more ways than we can imagine. And if we don't understand it, if we don't really show the numbers of where it's happening and why it's happening, then I think we're not doing our duty. It's not that it's very fun a lot of times, because we do take a lot of flack for this, but it's necessary, in my opinion. Just like you were saying, Josh, it's necessary because the idea of Disney is now becoming the very thought that is reality, and it's not. It's anything but reality, but that's what most people view now as reality in the wild.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, they've coined a term for it now. It's called nature deficit disorder. As our country continues to urbanize, people are becoming less and less aware of what is necessary in order to protect and conserve our natural resources, including our wildlife. And they are basing their opinions primarily by educate or entertainment, such as Disney movies, et cetera, which is what makes podcasts like yours and Seth so vitally important. Because I mean, people that know me, they say, why do you bother having these exchanges with the anti-hunters and things of that nature? You're never going to change their mind. Perhaps not, but really my arguments are not really targeted towards them. It's targeted for the people that I refer to as the popcorn eaters. You know, the ones that are watching the discussion go back and forth in the comments of your Instagram page and Seth's page, et cetera, et cetera. The people that are undecided and on the fence, that general population that you made reference to, they're looking for information so that they can come to whatever their opinion is about a particular topic, the wolf or the grizzly or logging, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's incumbent upon us that we do our very best to try and share as much information as we can with them, knowing that the information that we have has a tendency to be far more logically and scientifically substantiated. It's not coming from a position of our emotion or our feelings. It's based on our firsthand experiences as hunters and ranchers, et cetera, coupled with our passion and our insatiable appetite to better our own understanding of those things that we love so much, including our wildlife.
I wish I could just personally turn off my social media and live the life that I'm living now.
Me too sometimes.
And not have to worry about like what's happening or what I might lose as part of something that I love. I wish I could just live my life. I wish people could just stay in their own lane and live their life however they want and not worry about what the other person is doing and how they live. I want to fight for what I believe in, and hopefully, you know, maybe one day my kids can enjoy what I choose to enjoy, you know, whether they want to or not. You know, that's kind of like the momentum of why I do it is like, I want to protect my way of life so that maybe my kids or other people's kids can enjoy the same thing. And I feel like if I turned it off, I don't know if I'd let a lot of people down, but I feel like I'm beyond that now. Like, I feel like I almost have a responsibility to keep advocating, you know, to protect our way of life, really. I mean, above everything. Like, I don't know. It's just, I wish I could turn it off. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to hit delete and and disappear. So, but I know, Trinity, you said, we were speaking on the phone last week, you're like, something to the effect of the people, I don't know if you remember, the people that should be doing this are usually the people that don't want to be doing it. Something like that.
Well, that's the case with most things, politics as well. The people that would really be good at it don't want to do it. I would hate politics, but we understand that there's a bigger problem here, and if we don't do it, who's going to do it? If we don't speak up, and so it's just kind of one of those things. Well, thank you guys, man. I really appreciate this conversation. Hopefully this turned out well. I will send it to both of you. So,
hey, Trinity, I just want to say thank you for everything that you do and all the stuff that you're putting out there. I learn a lot from your videos. I enjoy watching them. I share them to everybody, and I know everybody's like, "Who's that guy? That guy's smart, and I love his stuff." And you're doing a great job. So thank you. And Josh, you're doing a good job too
as well, Trinity.
I appreciate that. Thank you guys.